Sarah Mitchell was 28 years old when she decided her workout routine at the Naval Base gym needed an adjustment. She woke up every day at 5 in the morning, put on her workout uniform, and headed to the gym located a few meters from the main barrack. The San Diego Naval Base was immense, housing thousands of military personnel of different ranks and specialties. And the gym was one of the few places where everyone mingled without much ceremony. That Thursday morning, Sarah arrived a few minutes earlier than usual. The sun hadn't fully risen yet, leaving the sky with that dark blue hue that precedes dawn. She liked this time because the gym was less crowded, allowing her to train with more peace and focus. Sarah wasn't a very tall woman, measuring about 5 feet 5 inches, but her physique was impressive for someone of her height. Years of intense training had sculpted her muscles remarkably, and she was proud of every physical achievement she had attained. She began her workout with a warm-up on the treadmill, gradually increasing her speed until she reached a comfortable running pace. As she ran, she watched other soldiers arrive and spread out across the equipment. Most were men, as always, but Sarah was used to that. She never let herself be intimidated by the male predominance in the military environment. On the contrary, it always motivated her to be even better, even more competent. After 20 minutes on the treadmill, Sarah headed to the free weight area. It was her favorite part of the workout. She loaded the barbell with 20 kilos on each side and positioned herself to do deadlifts, one of the most complete exercises there was. She adjusted her posture, planted her firmly on the ground, gripped the barbell with a firm grip, and began to perform the repetitions with impeccable technique. That's when she noticed a group of recruits entering the academy. There were about 5 or 6 young men, all looking like they had just left adolescence, full of energy and that typical excitement of those in their first months of military service. They talked loudly, laughed, and playfully pushed each other as they made their way to the bench press area. Sarah didn't pay much attention to them initially. She continued her workout, focused on maintaining proper form and counting her repetitions. But after completing her second set, she noticed that one of the recruits had separated from the group and was walking toward her. He was a tall young man, probably around 22 years old, with short blonde hair and an expression of overconfidence on his face. He stopped a few feet from her, crossed his arms, and watched as Sarah prepared to begin her third set. She completely ignored him, concentrating on her breathing and the execution of the movement. She gripped the bar, bent over keeping her back straight, and began to lift the weight. It was in the middle of his second repetition that he spoke, in a tone that tried to be authoritative, but came across as more arrogant. "Hey, you're doing it wrong. You need to tilt it more, lower it more, bend it more." He gestured with his hands, exaggerating the movement. Sarah finished her repetition before answering. She carefully placed the bar back on the floor and turned to face him. "Thank you for your concern, but I'm doing it correctly," she said calmly, her voice firm but polite. The recruit chuckled briefly and shook his head. "No, it's not. Look, I know you. Women have difficulty with these heavy exercises, but if you don't do them right, you'll end up hurting yourself." Sarah felt a pang of irritation, but she maintained her composure. She had been through similar situations before and knew exactly how to handle them. "I appreciate your opinion, but I have years of experience with weightlifting. I'm comfortable with my technique." The recruit didn't seem satisfied with the answer. He took a step forward, slightly encroaching on her personal space. "Look, I'm just trying to help. You need to lower yourself more, like this." He made the movement again, now closer to her. "Lower yourself. Bend your legs. Come on, let me show you." Before Sarah could answer, he continued, now in a tone that sounded decidedly like an order. "Turn around and bend down. Let me see how you're doing it." Sarah felt the blood rush to her face. She could tolerate mansplaining about exercise technique. She could even tolerate the presumption and condescension, but this had crossed a line. The way he said it, the tone he used, the implication in his words, it was all completely inappropriate. She stepped forward, closing the distance between them even further, and looked him directly in the eyes. "Recruit, I suggest you get back to your training now." The young man blinked, surprised by the firmness in her voice, but quickly regained his arrogant posture. "Hey, relax. I'm just trying to help. You don't need to be so defensive. I'm not being defensive. I'm being clear. Go back to your training. He snorted and rolled his eyes. Wow. So sensitive. Can't even handle a correction. Typical. It was at that moment that one of the other recruits in his group shouted from the bench press area, "Hey, Johnson! Leave the commander alone and come do your workout." The recruit named Johnson turned angrily toward his colleague. "What commander? It's just another one." He stopped mid-sentence when his eyes finally focused on the insignia Sarah wore on her training uniform. Sarah saw the exact moment the realization hit his face. His eyes widened, the color drained from his cheek, and his mouth parted slightly. He looked at the badges, then at her face, then back at the badges, as if unable to process the information. "Commander Sarah Mitchell," she said calmly, maintaining eye contact. "Commander of the Tactical Operations Division of this base. And you just gave me an order, recruit." The silence that followed was deafening. Everyone in the gym had stopped what they were doing and was staring in their direction. Johnson's friends were frozen in the bench press area, their expressions ranging from horror to vicarious embarrassment. Johnson seems to have forgotten how to breathe. His face had gone from pale to bright red in a matter of seconds. I didn't. Ma'am, I didn't know that ... A ball quotes attention, recruit, Sarah said, her voice now with that commanding tone she used during operations. Johnson immediately straightened his body, placing his arms straight at his sides and fixing his gaze on a point above Sarah's head. His whole body was tense, trembling slightly. Sarah circled him slowly, inspecting his posture as she would during a formal search. "How many months of service have you been in?" "3 months, ma'am," he replied, his voice now very different from the arrogant tone it had had before. "3 months," Sarah repeated, shaking her. "And in 3 months, you haven't learned to check rank insignia before addressing a superior officer? Haven't learned to maintain a respectful distance? Haven't learned that giving orders to a superior is a direct violation of the chain of command?" "I have no excuse, ma'am. I was wrong, ma'am." Sarah stopped in front of him again. "You weren't just wrong, Private Johnson. You were disrespectful, intrusive, and completely inappropriate. The way you approached me, what you said, and how you said it would all be unacceptable even if I were a civilian. But it's especially serious considering I'm your superior officer." "Yes, ma'am. I'm sorry, ma'am." Sarah crossed her arms. "Your remorse will be demonstrated through actions, not words. You will report to my office at 7 o'clock tomorrow morning. We will have a longer conversation about proper conduct, respect, and the consequences of your action. Understood?" "Yes, ma'am." "Understood, ma'am. And Recruit Johnson, for the remainder of your time at this base, you will treat all military personnel, regardless of gender or rank, with the utmost respect. If I hear of any further incidents involving you and inappropriate behavior, the consequences will be far more severe. Is that clear?" "Crystal clear, ma'am." Dismissed. Johnson left his position of attention, gave a quick, awkward salute, and practically ran out of the academy, leaving his friends behind. The other recruits in the group quickly gathered their things and followed him, muttering apologies as they passed Sarah. After they left, Sarah returned to her deadlift bar. She could feel the stares of the others in the gym, but chose to ignore them. She adjusted her stance, took a deep breath, and completed her remaining set with the same perfect technique as before. An older man, wearing captain's insignia, approached her as she rested between sets. "That was well managed, Commander Mitchell." Sarah nodded. "Thank you, sir. Unfortunately, this isn't the first time I've dealt with situations like this." The captain sighed. "That's true. The way you handled it was exemplary, firm but fair, exactly as it should be." After the captain walked away, Sarah reflected on the incident. She didn't feel any particular satisfaction in humiliating the young recruit, but she knew it was necessary. If she had let it go, he would have continued with that behavior, possibly escalating into even more serious situations. Sometimes, a hard lesson learned early was the best way to avoid bigger problems. Sarah Mitchell had joined the Navy at the age of 20, shortly after graduating with a degree in mechanical engineering. She had always known she wanted to serve her country, and the structure, discipline, and purpose of military life deeply appealed to her. The early years were challenging. She faced prejudice, veiled and sometimes overt discrimination, and had to work twice as hard as her male colleagues to receive the same recognition. but she never gave up. Every obstacle became a motivation to be better, stronger, more competent. She specialized in tactical operations, demonstrated exceptional leadership in multiple missions, and quickly rose through the ranks. By the age of 28, she had achieved the rank of command, leading an entire division and earning the respect of her subordinates and superiors. The next day, Sarah was in her office at 7 o'clock sharp, as promised. Her office was simple but functional, with a large desk, a few chairs, a filing cabinet, and the flags of the United States and the Navy on the walls. She was reviewing reports when she heard a hesitant knock on the door. "Come in," she said without lifting her eyes from the papers. Johnson entered, visibly nervous. He was impeccably dressed in his uniform, his posture correct, but his expression was one of pure discomfort. "Take a seat, Recruit Johnson," Sarah said, gesturing to the chair in front of her desk. He sat on the edge of the chair, his back straight, his hands on his knees. Sarah finally looked up and studied him for a moment. "Recruit Johnson, do you understand why you're here?" "Yes, ma'am." "Because of my unacceptable behavior yesterday at the gym?" "Correct. Now tell me, in your own words, what exactly did you do wrong?" Johnson swallowed hard. "I was disrespectful to you. I assumed you didn't know what you were doing because you're a woman. I invaded your personal space, and I gave you an order, and you are my superior officer. It was completely inappropriate, and I have no excuse." Sarah nodded. "That's an accurate assessment, but I want to dig deeper. Why did you act that way?" Johnson was silent for a moment, clearly uncomfortable. I think I was trying to impress my friends, and I had this idea that women aren't as strong as men in the gym, so I thought I was helping. But now I realize I was being arrogant and sexist." "At least you have self-awareness," Sarah said. "That's a start. But self-awareness without behavioral change means nothing. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to do an educational program on respect in the military environment with a special focus on gender issues. In addition, you're going to do 300 push-ups and 500 sit-ups, spread over the next week. And finally, you're going to hand me a 5-page report on the history of women in the American Armed Forces and their contributions to the country." Johnson absorbed all of this with a serious expression. "Yes, ma'am." "When is the report?" "Expected to be ready 1 week from today." And Recruit Johnson, consider this an opportunity for growth, not a punishment. You have potential. Otherwise, you wouldn't have been accepted into the Navy. But attitude is just as important as physical ability. Do you understand that?" "Yes, ma'am. I understand." Sarah dismissed him, and Johnson left the office, clearly relieved that he hadn't faced more serious consequences. In the following weeks, Sarah occasionally saw Johnson at the base. He always saluted when he saw her, kept a respectful distance, and seemed to be taking his duties seriously. She received his report a week later and was impressed by the depth of the research and the apparent sincerity in his reflections on what he had learned. Life on the base continued as normal. Sarah led several successful tactical operations, trained new officers, and remained a respected presence throughout the facility. The incident at the academy became a story that circulated among the recruits, serving as a reminder that appearances can be deceiving and that respect should be universal. Sarah never regretted how she had handled the situation. She firmly believed that moments like that were learning opportunities, not only for the individual involved, but for everyone who witnessed or heard about what happened. Every time she entered the academy, she did so with the same confidence and focus as always, knowing that she had earned her place there through hard work, dedication, and unquestionable competence. Sarah Mitchell never imagined that incident at the academy would become a turning point not only for Private Johnson, but for the entire dynamic of the San Diego Naval Base. In the weeks that followed, she noticed a subtle but significant change in how the younger servicemen interacted with her and the other women on the base. A month after the incident, Sarah was in her office reviewing plans for a joint training operation with the Air Force when she received a call from Captain Richardson, her immediate superior. He asked her to come to his office for an important meeting. Sarah organized her documents, adjusted her uniform, and walked through the corridors of central administration until she reached the captain's spacious office. Richardson was a man in his 50s, a veteran of several international missions, and known for his fair but demanding leadership. He gestured for Sarah to sit down and closed the door behind her, indicating a serious conversation. "Commander Mitchell, I've received some interesting reports in the last few weeks," he began, leaning on his desk. "It seems that the incident with Private Johnson had wider repercussions than we initially imagined." Sarah maintained a neutral expression, waiting for him to continue. "Since then, we have received 3 reports from other recruits, apologizing for past inappropriate behavior. Furthermore, basic training instructors have mentioned that new recruits are demonstrating greater awareness of issues of respect and appropriate conduct. It seems that the story of what happened spread quickly." Richardson paused and smiled slightly. "I won't lie, Commander. When I first heard about the incident, I was worried it might create unnecessary tension. But you handled it admirably, firm enough to make it clear that such behavior would not be tolerated, but also educational enough to turn the situation into a learning opportunity." Sarah relaxed a little in her chair. "Thank you, sir. I believe moments like this are crucial for establishing the culture we want to maintain on this basis." "I completely agree," Richardson said, returning to his own chair. "In fact, that's why I wanted to talk to you. We're developing a new mentoring program for newly arrived recruits, focused on leadership, diversity, and professional conduct. I'd like you to be one of the lead instructors for this program." Sarah felt a wave of satisfaction. It was exactly the kind of opportunities she had hoped would have a lasting impact. "It would be an honor, sir. When would we begin?" "In 3 weeks. You would work alongside Commander Torres and Lieutenant Commander Anderson. The program would be 4 hours, once a week, for each new group of recruits arriving at the base." They discussed the program details for another 40 minutes. Sarah took meticulous notes, already beginning to formulate ideas about how to structure her sessions. When she left Captain Richardson's office, she felt energized and purposeful in a way she hadn't felt in months. That afternoon, Sarah decided to do her training later than usual. At 6 o'clock, the academy was busier, full of military personnel of different ranks finishing their workdays. She entered and immediately noticed that several people greeted her respectfully. Some faces were familiar, others not so much, but all showed recognition of who she was. Sarah headed to the free weights and began her warm-up. She was in the middle of her second set of squats when she noticed a young, first-class sailor watching her from afar. The girl was no more than 22 years old, with brown hair tied in a tight ponytail and an expression of admiration on her face. After finishing her set, Sarah picked up her water bottle and noticed the young woman approaching shyly. "Can I help you, sailor?" Sarah asked gently. The girl blushed slightly. "Excuse me for bothering you. I just wanted to say that you are a great inspiration to me. I heard about what happened here a few weeks ago and how you handled it. It was very professional." Sarah smiled. "What's your name, sailor?" "Emily Rodriguez, ma'am." "How long have you been in the Navy, Rodriguez?" 8 months, ma'am. "I started right after graduating from college." Sarah gestured for her to come closer. "And how has your experience been so far?" Emily hesitated for a moment before answering. "Honestly, ma'am, it's been challenging. Not so much the physical work or the tasks themselves, but more the dynamics with some of the men. Sometimes I feel like I need to constantly prove my worth in ways that my male colleagues don't." Sarah nodded, understanding. "I completely understand. I went through the same thing when I was starting out. I still do sometimes, but let me give you some advice that changed my perspective when I was younger." Emily leaned forward slightly, clearly eager to listen. "You don't need to prove anything to anyone except yourself. Do your job with excellence, not because you want to prove something to skeptics, but because you take pride in doing everything to the best of your ability. When you shift your internal focus in this way, 2 things happen. First, you become free from the constant pressure of external validation. Second, your competence becomes so undeniable that eventually even the most resistant have to acknowledge it." Emily absorbed those words carefully. "And what happens when someone is openly disrespectful or inappropriate?" Then you establish firm boundaries immediately. Never let them cross. You don't need to be aggressive, but you need to be clear and consistent. If someone crosses a line, you point out exactly what was inappropriate and what the consequences will be if they continue. Most of the time, people back down when they realize you won't tolerate certain things. They chatted for a few more minutes before Sarah returned her workout. As she performed her repetitions, she reflected on how many times she herself would have loved to have a more experienced mentor when she was starting out. Perhaps this mentoring program could fill that gap for the next generation. 3 weeks later, Sarah was in a large conference room preparing for her first orientation session. The room held 50 people and was equipped with a projector, a large screen, and chairs arranged in a semicircle. 35 recruits entered promptly at 9 in the morning, a mix of men and women, all looking slightly nervous about what to expect. Commander Torres, a 40-year-old Hispanic with a reputation for being an excellent communicator, began the session with introductions and by explaining the structure of the program. Then he passed the floor to Sarah. Sarah walked to the front of the room and looked at the young faces before her. Good morning, everyone. My name is Commander Sarah Mitchell, and I will be speaking to you today about effective leadership and how to build a culture of mutual respect. But before we begin, I want you to know that this will not be a lecture where I talk and you just listen. I want you to participate, ask questions, and share your own experiences when you feel comfortable. She clicked the remote control and an image appeared on the screen showing a diverse team of soldiers working together on an operation. The strength of any military unit lies not only in the individual training of each member, but in how those members work together as a cohesive team. And a cohesive team can only exist when there is genuine mutual respect. Sarah spent the next hour presenting real-life scenarios, some based on her own experience, others on situations reported by colleagues. She asked the recruits to discuss in small groups how they would handle each situation, then shared how the situations were actually resolved and what worked and what didn't. One of the scenarios she presented was intentionally similar to her encounter with Johnson at the academy. Although she didn't mention that it was based on a real event, the recruits discussed animatedly how the person should respond, and Sarah was impressed by the maturity of many of the suggestions. Near the end of the session, a recruit raised his hand. He was a young African-American man with a thoughtful expression. Commander Mitchell, have you ever faced situations where you felt you were being treated differently, specifically because you are a woman? Sarah appreciated the frankness of the question. Absolutely, many times. From condescending comments about my physical abilities to being excluded from certain conversations or decisions. And I can tell you, it never gets completely. But I've learned that my response to these situations defines not only how I'm seen, but also what kind of environment I help create for others who come after me. Another recruit, a shy-looking young Asian woman, hesitantly raised her hand. And what if you're the one who makes a mistake? Ma'am? Like when you realize you might have been insensitive or disrespectful unintentionally? Excellent question, Sarah replied. The answer is simple, but not always easy to execute. You acknowledge the mistake, sincerely apologize, and demonstrate change through your future actions. We all make mistakes. What defines us is not the absence of mistakes, but how we respond when we make them. After the session ended and the recruits left, Commander Torres approached Sarah. That was exceptional, Mitchell. You have a natural talent for this. The recruits were completely engaged. Sarah smiled, feeling pleased with how the first session had gone. Thank you, Torres. I think this program can really make a difference. In the following months, Sarah continued conducting these sessions regularly, each with a new group of recruits. She began to notice tangible changes at the base. Fewer incidents of harassment were reported. More women felt comfortable taking on leadership positions. The overall atmosphere seemed more professional and respectful. As for Private Johnson, Sarah saw him occasionally around the base. He always greeted her respectfully and seemed to have taken his lessons seriously. On one occasion, she saw him intervene when another recruit was being inappropriate with a female sailor, calmly but firmly explaining why that behavior was unacceptable. Sarah felt a sense of satisfaction at seeing that his educational approach had actually worked.